most of us by now, the recession is definitely affecting the way that we shop, and that includes the holiday season. Parents Magazine surveyed over 1,000 moms, and all of them said they're cutting back on spending. In fact, nearly half said they'll cut back on gifts. 70% plan to cut back on things for themselves to afford presents for their children. Cutting back, of course, is never easy. Neither is making your kids understand why you're doing it. Here to help, Parents Magazine Deputy Editor Diane Debrovner. Good to have you back this morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
This, though, is, I feel like, I have to say, this can actually be a great lesson for kids that you don't have to get everything you want.
Absolutely. And parents need to tell themselves that it's okay to say no.
Which it's so hard for parents to do these days. So what's your little tip for parents to make that okay?
Well, I think you want to prepare yourself in advance for having these types of conversations and to remind yourself that you're not just depriving your child, you're teaching them valuable life lessons about finances, and that part of growing up is really experiencing a little bit of disappointment and delayed gratification. That's a key life skill.
And in terms of finances, how much of that should you share with your children? Should you just be upfront and say, look, we can't afford as many gifts this year?
I think you should be honest but not alarmist. I think it's important for kids to know, to hear you say something like, we just can't afford to buy that right now. We're spending our money on the things that we really need. Or there are other families who can afford to spend more money on things than we can right now. And I think that's okay.
And that brings up, the other families brings up an important point, which for a lot of kids is peer pressure, especially at a certain age. You know, they come back to school after their winter break and everybody has these new things and they may feel like, oh, well, you know, I don't quite measure up after my holidays. How do you approach that with your kids?
Well, I think you can talk about the difference between wanting something and needing something. And you might even use a story from your own life about when you were a child and you didn't get something that you wanted. And that
you survived.
And that you survived. And your kids will survive. And the holidays are a great time to do something like work in a soup kitchen together or volunteer for a toy drive to really sort of drive home the point about wanting and needing and how your kids are very lucky and that you're going to take care of their needs.
It's a great way, you know, we always hear people say, oh, the reason for the season and why are we really, you know, all celebrating and taking care of one another. But it's such a great point, whether or not there's a recession, whether or not you're cutting back, helping your kids do good for others.
Absolutely. And, you know, and managing their expectations about, you know, what brings them real happiness is a lesson to talk about the holidays, but all year long. Your child is probably going to be just as happy to spend the whole day baking cookies for you and wrapping them up for your neighbors than playing with the trendy toy that she'll forget about.
I was going to say forget about in 3 days. Exactly. Diane, great to have you with us. Thanks
nice
again.
To see you.